The day my parents froze my $520,000 trust, the sun was shining like nothing had happened. Birds were moving across the pale morning sky. Traffic hummed outside my apartment window, and a half-finished cup of coffee sat beside my laptop while my entire life quietly collapsed inside. A bank's fraud department? I didn't find out from my mother. I didn't find out from my father. I found out from a polite woman named Maribel at Harbor West Private Banking, who cleared her throat 3 times before telling me my access had been suspended because someone had submitted a power of attorney claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own finances. For 10 full seconds, I said nothing. I just stared at the sunlight on my kitchen floor and felt something cold move through my chest. My parents had not just lied about money. They had tried to erase my voice. And the worst part was, they forgot what I did for a living. I hunted fraud. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories where the truth finally stands up for the person everyone underestimated, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps stories like this reach someone who may need the courage to fight back. My name is Soren Vale, and for 9 years I worked as a forensic claims investigator. My job was to follow paper trails, expose forged signatures, uncover hidden accounts, and prove when someone's polished story did not match the evidence. I had investigated greedy business partners, fake heirs, stolen insurance claims, and families who turned love into a weapon the moment money appeared. But I never imagined that one day the case file would have my own last name on it. The trust came from my grandmother, Odelia Vale. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was already enough. When I was a boy, she would take me to the farmer's market every Saturday morning, buy peaches wrapped in brown paper, and tell me that money was not meant to make people powerful. It was meant to make them free. When she died, she left me a trust of $520,000. Not because I was her favorite, she wrote in her letter, but because I was the one who had survived the family without becoming cruel. My parents never forgave her for that sentence. My father, Bram, was a man who wore pressed shirts and carried disappointment like a second wallet. My mother, Celestine, could smile beautifully while saying something that left a bruise inside you for years. They had always believed I owed them obedience. When I became successful without their help, they called me arrogant. When I refused to invest in my father's failing property scheme, they called me selfish. When I used part of my trust income to help my neighbor, a widowed father named Kaito, pay for his daughter's surgery, my mother asked why strangers deserved my money more than blood. I told her blood was not a receipt. That was the last calm conversation we had. On that bright Tuesday morning, after the bank call ended, I sat at my desk and opened a blank investigation folder. I named it Vale Trust Interference. My hands were steady, but my stomach was twisting. There is a strange pain in investigating your own family. Every document feels like a betrayal twice over. Once because they did it, and once because you are forced to prove they were capable of doing it. The bank sent me a scanned copy of the power of attorney. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine, but it looked like someone had practiced it from an old birthday card. The letters leaned wrong. The pressure was inconsistent. Even worse, the document claimed it had been signed in front of a notary on a date when I had been giving testimony at a fraud seminar in Denver. I had hotel receipts, flight records, badge scans, and a room full of witnesses who had watched me speak about forged authorization forms. For the first time that morning, I laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes out when pain finally meets absurdity. Then I noticed the attached physician statement. According to the document, a doctor named Dr. Harlan Vaith had certified that I suffered from diminished executive capacity. I had never heard of him. I searched his license number and found the first crack in their plan. The license belonged to a retired podiatrist in another state, who had stopped practicing 6 years earlier. The clinic address on the form was a nail salon. By noon, the case was already bleeding evidence. Still, knowing the truth and making other people believe it are 2 different battles. My parents called me at 1:17 p.m. My mother spoke first, soft and wounded, as if I had hurt her by discovering her crime. She said they were only trying to protect me. My father said my erratic generosity proved I was not thinking clearly. He mentioned Kaito's daughter like she was a symptom instead of a child. He said the trust needed responsible oversight until I became stable. I stood by the window and watched. School buses rolled down the street in the golden afternoon light. Somewhere, children were going home to parents who would ask about their day. Mine were explaining why stealing my future was love, I did not yell. I did not threaten. I simply told them that if they had filed false documents, they needed a lawyer. My mother went silent. My father called me ungrateful. Then the line went dead. The next few days became a blur of emails, affidavits, and long hours under daylight that felt too normal for what was happening. I contacted the bank's legal department, filed a formal fraud complaint, and requested the original submission metadata. Because my parents had delivered the documents electronically, there would be timestamps, IP logs, device identifiers, and upload history. People who forge documents often obsess over the signature and forget the invisible fingerprints around it. By Friday morning, I had enough to know exactly how they did it. The power of attorney had been uploaded from my father's home office. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Mireya Sol, who had reported her seal stolen 4 months earlier. The witness signature belonged to my mother's cousin, who had died the previous winter. The fake doctor form had been created from a template downloaded from a legal website, then edited on a computer registered to my parents' household. But the deepest cut came from the supporting letter. My parents had written that I had become unstable after my grandmother's death, that I was isolating myself, giving money away recklessly, and showing signs of paranoia. They described me as lonely, confused, and vulnerable. They used every private wound I had ever carried and turned it into evidence against me. I read that letter sitting alone in a small cafe near the courthouse, sunlight falling across the table, people laughing around me as if the world had not changed. My coffee went cold. I remembered being 12 years old and hearing my mother tell an aunt that I was too sensitive for real life. I remembered being 17 and my father saying I would never handle pressure. I remembered every time they made me doubt my own strength. And suddenly I understood that the forgery was not the beginning. It was the paperwork version of what they had been doing for years. They had always tried to take authority over my life. This time they had just signed their names near the crime. My attorney, a sharp and calm woman named Priya Nasser, filed an emergency petition to restore my access and freeze any further action from my parents. At the hearing, my parents arrived dressed like grieving saints. My mother wore pearls. My father carried a folder he barely opened. They looked across the courtroom at me with eyes full of disappointment, as if I had dragged the family into public shame, instead of pulling their lie into daylight. The judge listened quietly while their attorney argued that they were concerned parents acting out of love. Then Priya stood and laid out the evidence one piece at a time. My travel records, the dead witness, the stolen notary seal, the fake doctor, the upload logs, the forged signature analysis. With every exhibit, my father's face tightened. My mother's perfect posture began to fold. When the judge asked my father whether he had personally submitted the documents, he hesitated. It was only 2 seconds, but 2 seconds can tell the truth louder than a confession. The judge restored my trust access that day and referred the matter for criminal review. But victory did not feel like I expected. I walked out of the courthouse into warm afternoon sun, and instead of feeling powerful, I felt hollow. People think justice fills the space betrayal leaves behind. It doesn't. Justice opens the door. Healing is the long walk after. For weeks, I avoided my parents' calls. Then one morning, a letter arrived from my mother. No apology, not really. She wrote that she had been scared. Scared my father would lose the house. Scared of getting older. Scared that I no longer needed them. She said she convinced herself the trust belonged to the family, and if I would not help willingly, they had the right to step in. Near the end, she wrote one sentence that stayed with me. I forgot you were a person before you were my son. I read it 3 times. My father never wrote. He only sent word through his attorney that he was open to resolving things privately. That sounded exactly like him. Even his regret came with negotiation terms. The criminal case moved slowly, as most real cases do. There were interviews, depositions, and long stretches of silence. My parents' social circle turned against me at first. Some relatives said I should have handled it quietly. Some said parents make mistakes. Some asked whether I really needed that much money. I learned that people become very forgiving when they are not the ones being robbed. But something unexpected happened too. Kaido showed up at my door one Saturday morning with his little daughter, Ari, who was now healthy enough to walk without getting tired. She handed me a crooked handmade card covered in suns and blue flowers. Inside, in careful child handwriting, it said, "Thank you for helping my dad keep me here." I broke down right there in the doorway. That was the moment the trust became real to me again. Not as a number. Not as an inheritance. Not as the thing my parents tried to control. It was my grandmother's final act of faith in me. It was proof that money could become medicine, rent, education, safety, and second chances. It could become sunlight in someone else's darkest room. So I made a decision. After the legal dust settled, I placed a portion of the trust into a new foundation named after my grandmother. The Odelia Fund helped single parents facing medical emergencies, legal abuse, or sudden financial hardship. I also created a small fraud education program for young adults, teaching them how to protect their signatures, documents, bank accounts, and elderly relatives from manipulation. Every class began with the same sentence. The people who hurt you may know your heart, but that does not mean they get to own your life. Months later, my mother asked to meet me at a park. It was daytime, the kind of clear, bright afternoon my grandmother would have loved. Children ran through the grass. An old man fed pigeons near the fountain, and my mother sat on a bench looking smaller than I remembered. For once, she wore no pearls, no performance, just tired eyes and trembling hands. She apologized. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough that I could hear the fear underneath the pride. She admitted she had signed what my father placed in front of her. She admitted she knew it was wrong. She admitted that calling it protection was easier than calling it greed. I did not hug her. I did not promise everything would go back to normal. Some doors once broken cannot simply be painted and called repaired. But I told her I hoped she would become honest enough to live with herself. And for me, that was mercy. My father pleaded guilty to reduced fraud-related charges the following spring. My mother received probation for her cooperation. The trust remained mine. The house they tried to save was sold anyway. Their reputation, the thing they had guarded more carefully than their children, cracked in public. But I did not celebrate their downfall. By then, I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me long before I was ready to hear it. Freedom is not proving that the people who hurt you are monsters. Freedom is no longer needing them to become heroes in order for your life to begin. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs strength. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who are silently fighting battles their own families created. And before the ending, please comment this line. Truth protects what love should never betray. Today, the Odelia Fund has helped more than 40 families. Ari sends me a drawing every Christmas. Priya became a close friend. And every Saturday morning, when the sunlight hits my kitchen floor, I make coffee, open the windows, and remember my grandmother's voice telling me that money was meant to make people free. My parents tried to freeze my trust by forging my name. But in the end, all they froze was the version of me that still wanted their permission to be whole. And when that ice finally broke, I did not just get my money back. I got myself back.